Hello, everyone. This is the March 30th version of our online lecture. This week is going to be far less intensive than last week, especially because we don't have 2 full weeks of material that you need to cover. We're also really just focusing now on developing the feedback that you got on the proposal and translating that into a strong outline that's due next week. It's due at the end of this week, sorry. But also now thinking towards the final paper. And one of the things that I want to highlight here is that the way you conclude your work in a research paper setting is a little bit different than what you've probably been told previously when you've been working with other genres. So different forms of writing are requiring different types of parameters for concluding your position. It doesn't have to be super long in this sense, but you do need to be able to conclude well. So I want to focus on that today. This PowerPoint is already up under class materials, which is under content on Econestoga. There's also a handout there that I will go to in a little bit, just so that we have an idea of how this all looks. So, there's three main misconceptions that I want to debunk here, and then we're going to delve into the facts about them. The first one is that conclusions should be a summary about the paper's main points. One of the things that happens inevitably when we're talking about conclusions, if we were in a class setting, is that everybody would kind of raise their hands and go, well, it's a summary of what your main points were, and then you just kind of, sum up your work and then you leave. It's like, well, nobody wants to read what you just wrote me again. For me, yeah, you might need a brief overview of like a key salient point or whatever. But frankly, you don't need that to the same extent that you do in different types of papers. If I wanted you to just summarize what you just told me, I would just skip to the conclusion. Like, I actually want to learn from you. I want you to be able to drive home something that I can take away from whatever you've just written. You've put a lot of effort into the paper, even if you've done it the night before. You've still put effort into this over the past few weeks. You want me to remember something about your work. The conclusion's the space to make that happen. So don't just summarize. You want to actually think about what the meaning of all of this is for your selected reader. The second misconception is that you need to restate your thesis. So for some people, this is restate your thesis at the beginning of your conclusion and then just summarize the rest. Forget it. The days of that are over. I don't need that crap anymore. Your main point should already be obvious to me. If it isn't, I don't want you to then throw it into the conclusion and hope for the best. I want you to make it clear earlier on. It's pretty simple. The thesis, instead, should just come out organically as you articulate your goals and you ascribe that meaning. And I'm going to ask you some questions here shortly. I'm going to outline questions shortly that help you just get there organically. The last thing is that this happens a lot, especially in this type of course, where it's definitely not your first priority. I understand that. But people don't put maximum effort into this paper. And then they end up going, oh shit, I need to put my sources in somewhere. So what I get is like a data dump at the end, and somebody's just like, oh, I threw my 2 or 3 sources into my conclusion. Like, that's not what we've worked towards all semester. That's not the way we've discussed working with paragraphs and developing ideas and analyzing those ideas. Do not present new sources to me and then hope that I'm going to give you the same grade as I would if you actually did the work in depth. This isn't a place to go, oh crap, I got to put my sources in. It's a place to leave me with something that I can remember. So frankly, gone are the days of that crappy little summary at the end of your paper that you probably did in high school. I did it too, where it says, in conclusion, like as if I need you to signpost that for me. I don't need you to tell me that's the conclusion. I know. It's the last bloody paragraph you have. It might even be more than one paragraph, but Don't make it a summary. Don't start with in conclusion. Just jump into things. Start your discussion. You also may need more than one paragraph. Like keep your paragraphs short and then use a little bit more space by breaking them up if necessary. I'm totally okay if you go a little bit over your page limit or whatever if you need that space. Or if you're struggling to make the page count, this is a good opportunity to maybe stretch your conclusions a little bit and answer all the materials that we're going to cover here in depth. The 3 questions that I want you to ask are these. What can we learn from the discussion that you've just had in your paper? And where might we need more work? Like you can't cover everything, but what are some of the things that we can learn from what you've just told me? It's a teaching opportunity for you. You're teaching me something about an area of expertise that you have that I don't. So the fact that I'm teaching you and evaluating you aside, if you were writing this for a practical audience, you want them to take something away from your discussion. You're telling them something that you want them to understand. Well, make that very overt at the end of your conclusion, or in your conclusion, at the end of your paper. The second, how would you recommend the reader act upon what you've just said? As in, like, the conclusion should provide a way of acting in the world, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the third question is, ultimately, what do you want the reader to take away from the discussion? So this question and the first one are very interchangeable. I usually look at the first one as, what can we learn from the discussion that you've just had? And then this last question is targeted at that last line. I don't want you to send some cute quote to me from Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill or whatever. I don't care about that crap. I want you to end on something tangible and meaningful for me. So this last question is directed at that last sentence. If there's one last thing you want me to understand, if nothing else, if I don't remember a single thing about your paper, what is the one thing you want me to take away? That's what that last question is targeted at. The first one is more about overall understandings of the topic, like what have we learned from the discussion? The last one is, what's that one bloody thing I'm going to remember when I sit down and just relax at the end of the day? If you can answer each of these questions in like a sentence or two, then most of your conclusion is already written and your thesis is already teased out and your main points are already articulated well. Follow these questions, answer them. Don't actually put them in the paragraph, just put the answers in, and you should be totally okay. So, this is from the technical writing field in a sense, where a lot of research comes from in the first place. Research dissemination comes from. This is an overview of characteristics that form strong conclusions. We're not going to cover them all, but really strong conclusions, especially in our context that you're writing in, they're going to push against convention a little bit. They're going to provide me with actionable ideas. They're going to minimize summary. We just talked about that, or I just talked about that. You just listened to it. They might use anecdotes from their data sets, although that's not something you need to do. They highlight upcoming challenges. So when you're pointing towards the future, well, what are some challenges that we might face? What solutions or suggestions might you have? So some of you might cover this in the body of your work, but others might need a little bit more space to do this and do it in the conclusion. If you're looking ahead at whatever you're talking about, what does it look like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 25 years down the road? And what can we do about those futures to either make them happen or to prevent them, depending on what type of topic you're discussing? I also want you to end with a clear, direct message. Hit me over the head with something that I'm going to really buy into. And then, can I act upon it? So all of these are connected in various ways, and they come out through those 3 questions that I just asked, but we'll unpack what they look like. So, conclusions provide actionable ideas. I should have, as a reader, or your readers should have a deeper understanding of how they can implement the ideas. How can I act upon your ideas? What value does it mean for me? This is something that's becoming really important no matter what walk of life you're from, is being able to explain what we can do about it. This is something that is most prominent now, actually, in things like social media. The more that we're inundated with information from the web, the more we end up kind of going, and who cares? Well, this is where you're providing me with something that is more practical that I can work with. The actionable ideas, how can I act upon this, are super key to whatever we're doing. They minimize summary. We've talked about this already, so I won't dwell on it. But it's about how the ideas you present in your paper can now be acted upon. Forget telling me what you just told me. If you end up repeating a little bit of your main point, that's okay, in the sense that if you're using that main point to then point me towards something I can do about the discussion, I'm okay with that. So just as an example, if a student was writing about, say, melting sea ice and how it impacts climate change, just as a hypothetical here, I don't care if they repeat all their points. Instead, I want to see those ideas about melting sea ice translated into what can I do about it when I come to the conclusion. I've had students in the past also write on things like um, electric vehicles and what the future might be for them and how we're going to transition. Well, I don't need you repeating all your main points about how we might transition. But if you want to really drive home the idea that, hey, we're a hell of a long way away from actually having EVs in our everyday life for most people, make sure that's very clear by your conclusion. Don't make that something that's just a summative point that you've just thrown in there. Make sure I can act upon it. So what might society do to get closer to electric vehicles if we even should do that in the first place? Highlight upcoming challenges. This is something that would be really great if you could bring in. No study that you're going to do, especially in 3 to 4 pages, is going to be perfect. You're not going to have the answers to everything, although some people might think they do. There's a lot of moving parts to what you're talking about. You've been working on the project for a long time, in the sense that you started thinking about it, in the proposal. You've just received feedback that you're building into the outline. You're then going to build that into the final paper. What are things that you're like, I can't cover, but these are things that we need to look into a little bit more? Make that overt for me. Solutions. I want solutions somewhere in your paper. It doesn't have to be in the conclusions, but you can't provide just like these abstract solutions. It's like, oh, to achieve world peace, we need to be nicer to each other. It's like, great. Thank you. The Pope says stuff like that, and we get nowhere with it. I would rather you actually provide me with something that is tangible, something I can do. They need to make sense. It's like people just start totally ignoring conversations that they've heard before. It's like, oh, well, we need to do this because, well, it's good for human beings. It's like, yeah, but we don't do that. It's like, murder's bad. Well, no shit. Really. I want you to be able to point me to something that I can do. So the solutions or suggestions that you provide have to make sense to me. Don't give me these broad generalizations and be satisfied with them. What's maybe something that we can think about your topic differently? Make that clear to me in the end. And make that message at the end. This comes back to that third question I showed you earlier. Make it clear, make it direct. Really drive home exactly what you're trying to get across to me. Don't be cute. Don't be trying to, put a little bow on things. Make sure I'm leaving with a good idea of exactly what you're trying to get across. If there's one thing you got to tell me, tell it to me. So, in our course plan, I'm going to go on the admin page because I'm actually going to be able to access the document. You will see in class materials, concluding your work. Oh, I messed up. Bear with me. Here we are. Writing conclusions. This is something that's available to you now. It's still like a one-page handout just to show you how this can be enacted in like your paper. This comes from partially from a former student of mine when I first started teaching at the college. She was talking about women in the trades and how colleges could, attract more women and stuff like that. It's a very well done paper. As I'm talking here, this is not loading, so welcome to Econestoga. I'm going to download it, and what you're going to see is not only the template that we can use, but you're also going to see some of the questions that I just asked in a more simplified way. So you're going to be able to actually use this as a base for what you're talking about. Enable editing. I'll make this a little bit bigger so it's easier for us to find. So I have that first slide that I showed you with the misconceptions and what you actually should think about it. The 3 questions here. And then the way that this person implemented them. So here were her answers to these. And then she had to kind of fill in the blanks, but those answers made the formula for this paragraph here. You'll find your own way of doing this. Everybody tailors it to their own needs, but it's just one of those things that helps if you see how it's done. So this is available to you. Don't dwell on it too much. It's just there as a parameter. If you take the questions that I asked at the beginning, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and go to the top. You take these questions and you answer them in a line or two each. Most of your conclusion is done. You just need to add in a little bit of background and maybe a couple things to get from point A to point B or whatever. But for the most part, everything's right there for you. Answer the questions, then you have the base. Simple as that. Now, I'm going to go to the assignments for this week. It's really simple. The comprehensive outline, which we talked about in the video last week, so if you don't know what the hell you're doing, go back to that video at the end because it's there. Or you could do a draft of your work. Either way, I'm good. I'm expecting the same level of detail on either one, really. So if you do a draft and you're not quite done, I'm okay with that, but make it a decent draft. I will give you feedback either way, as much feedback as I can give you. It's due this Friday. You're getting this on March 30th. This thing's due on Friday, April 3rd. This isn't a surprise because it was in the video last week. We talked about this. Some of you have been in contact with me already, so don't sweat it. Quiz 5 is also now open. It closes April 13th. Again, this is one of those revision quizzes. The top 4 grades on your quizzes actually translate to your final grade. The lowest mark gets dropped. So if you're satisfied with the grades that you've received on your quizzes, then you don't even have to do this quiz technically. If you'd like to bump up your grade, or if, say, a quiz didn't go well, then by all means do this quiz and I'll get you, get it graded as quickly as I can. It's the same style as all the other quizzes. You have the multiple guess questions. I call them multiple guess because that's basically all people do anyway. They're available at the top. They're not worth nearly as much as the short answer, which are underneath. I always tell people, give me the short answers in depth, because the more depth you give me there, the higher I can give you as a grade. And I control that aspect. So the more you can give me to control in that process, the better off we all are. The reading is still in the instructional plan under course content. It's called, I can't remember what week it's under. It's probably week 11 or 12 or something like that. It's called Go Beyond the Equity Handbook by Riley Yesno. It's not a good reading. Like all of them so far, it's not great. It's just kind of there. I wish we could change it. We can't. So just make the most of this. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to highlight is that your final paper, when you go to do it, should be about 3 to 4 pages, not including your reference list in IEEE format. It's not that long when you actually put everything together. So make the outline or the draft as comprehensive as you can, because it'll really ease your load going forward. The more that you can get done at this stage, the easier it is on you going forward. Because once we finish all of this, there's not going to be that much left. Okay, so focus on this, get that outline into me, do quiz 5, and you're pretty well home free other than touching up your final paper or putting it into formal paper structure after I give you the feedback. So please, if you have questions, you're not certain on things, if you're falling behind and you need, time or whatever, email me as soon as you can. My Conestoga Outlook email is always open to you. You're going to get another video like this next week, even shorter, I promise. We'll be all right. You'll be fine. We're going to get you through the course. Just stay the course. Keep submitting assignments. You'll be good. Talk to you guys later.